we're already dropping in. So yeah, like if you look at the 2-year-old, you got the no. Then you got this notion of like, this set of words results in changes in behavior.
Sure.
And then this set of words results in changes of behavior that I can predict. Then this set of words results in changes of behavior that I can predict and control. Now I'm full-fledged adult. I'm a human.
Well, right, person actually is the word I use.
I'm a person, right? Exactly. I'm a person. So you got your 2-year-old who is ruthlessly, there's no pretense. She's like, she just iterates through combinations of words until she finds the one that pushes the button she's looking to push. I'm like, okay, cool. Thank you for not deceiving me into thinking that things are other than they are.
Right. Well, then you'll watch at 4, what will happen is she'll start playing around with lying. Okay?
Right.
So
right. Theory of mind drops in.
Right. And then this whole idea of, well, wait a minute, I can make reality happen. I distinctly remember coming in, my 4-year-old daughter, we told her, don't eat the cookies. And you came in and they're all over her face, It's like, so where'd the cookies go? I don't know. Did you eat them?
Cookies,
no. Exactly. What are they?
Cookie.
It's like, but what about that chocolate on your face? Oh, okay. Now all of a sudden it's like, now I can't just mold reality completely to my world. So the way in which kids lie, and the more they lie, that's actually a better sign overall, because it shows cognitive flexibility and creativity, as long as you shape them.
Right. Because you need to be careful to recognize, as you said, there's boundaries that, I can't lie to a tree. I definitely can't lie to a forest fire. Forest fires don't care about the words I say. And the problem of taking reality, like you loop it back, you internalize and metabolize too much of reality as being a human phenomenon. So you don't actually get a felt sense of the boundaries of lying, which is pretty funny. And then, I guess if I can take that and kind of loop it all the way from the bottom, you say, oh yes, and by the way, humanness is also a forest, right? The basis of the systems of justification are sitting on top of a more natural systems of coordinated behavior, to use your language.
Right.
And
exactly.
if I lie so vigorously as to disrupt the underlying basis of communication, of justification at all, then I've really done myself a disservice, because I am what is called fucked.
Hey, that's the technical term.
It's the technical term.
So I like to talk about us as humans. We are humans who are primates and people. Okay. So, we're the embedded primates, and then we built this person culture layer of justification that we socialize our children into. But that's the forest that's growing on top of our primate world.
All right. So in let's reset, and let's go back to just, all right, what do we mean by systems of justification?
Right. This concept of justification, the way I use, has lots of different flavors and meanings. So, but systems then are network systems of legitimizing is and ought, basically. Okay. So the word paradigm, the propositional networks of paradigms would be systems of justification. Okay.
So is and ought, or what is true and what is good.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. And there's a holding of some kind of sort of network. I'm almost seeing almost like a matrix, which is, of course, is a high dimensional network that allows a particular, I guess now, utterance, right? Because we're in language space, a particular utterance to be positioned in terms of its value of truth and its value of good. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I think I may have mentioned that this question was my thesis at Harvard. I worked on this piece. So it's interesting as you're saying it, I'm actually like in the back of my mind trying to dust off the ways that I thought about it, whatever it was 20 years ago. Nice. We are coordinated. So it's this, I have an argument, and my argument is a modulation of 3 things. One is, as you say, the embedding of a series of utterances in a system of justification, which is trying to create as much value as possible, trying to make as true and good or valuable argument, set of propositions as I can put forward.
Yep.
And then one is the groundingness of it, right? The degree to which the truth, the epistemological framework of our system of justification loops back, right? Because there's always a bit of a checksum on the truth side. Right?
Yep.
You know, whatever you do, don't do that because a lion's about to eat you. The lion over there, dude. Oh shit, my argument just fell to pieces. And then the third piece is then, of course, there's the counter arguments. There's a whole other modulations of clusters of propositions that are balancing, you know, in weight. And there's a sensing of, okay, our paradigm has found a way of weighing these things against each other.
Right.
And then as we do that, we come to a way of saying, oh, okay, that's the thing that has the most value, the most truth, and the most goodness to it, and therefore.
Exactly. Exactly. And then it's hierarchically and centrally networked. So some of the unbelievably core things, right, that are central to the justification system. Peter Limburg, you know, did that multipolar culture work.
Yeah.
And he identified all the different paradigms, and he had a wonderful table where they had the core belief and then the core antithesis. So who were the good players? What are the core beliefs that we justify? What is our big threat? Okay, so that shows sort of the systemic, hierarchical, structural nature about what's central, what's proximal to the system. In other words, another way of looking at it, like at James Madison University, we have a mission statement, right? So then everything is going to then stem out from this value, vision, truth statement. And then how does it fit? And are you a part of this system of justification in a particular way?
Okay, neat. So what's coming to me is something along the lines of, I can't remember exactly who it is. It's in mathematics, but the notion is that I can't construct a higher logic out of a lower logic. That the instantiation of an axiomatic of a particular system of justification creates the boundary conditions of what it is.
Like Gödel? Are you thinking of?
Well, it's very Gödelian, yeah, very, very. But there's somebody else more specific who was talking about it in a slightly different domain. But it's okay. That's a good reference to kind of orient what I'm talking about. So there's something like, you know, once I've established these axiomatics, I've created a field of play. It's kind of like the rules of football or the rules of chess. It is completely like the rules of chess. Exactly. It is isomorphic. They are the same thing. And what's interesting is that, okay, there's a lot of things inside the space, and many, many different variations of the game of chess that you can play, but it is also bounded. Right? There's an infinitely large number of things that are not chess. And so this is the problem. I think the primary problem that we run into so often, and I guess now in particular is kind of a running up against it, which is that, oh shit, how funny. The lacuna, I just fell into it.
Right, well, we are in this unprestatable space, right? It's like, well, what? Yeah.
Right, okay. So if I, as a child, for example, find myself almost like moving away from the location that is aware of the notion of chess as being just one axiomatic, one paradigm,
right?
And or for example, my language, my cultural, my system of justification as being just A, and by definition, a finite space in the context of an infinite space, then I am quite stuck. I'm stuck in two very specific ways. One is if the moves that I need to make are outside of the rule set that I now perceive as obligate and exhaustive of all possible moves, then I'm going to fail, sometimes known as die or lack of fitness. And also, something like, how's this work? Like, to the degree to which there are, like in Peter Limburg's thing, there are built-in antipathies, built-in conflicts, and I'm wondering to the degree which that's intrinsic, and maybe it is.
It is. I'll explain to you exactly why. It's very cliche. That is intrinsic. that the antithopy is contingent. It's also what you said, that propositional elements open up the void space all around them. Okay, so when you make claims, then you open up counterfactual space claims, which is really the root of it all. So, so first, if we want to travel this path a little bit. So obviously you're really familiar with John and his four. So one aspect of John's frame is, of course, his 4 P's of knowing. Okay, so we have procedural knowing, perspectival, and participatory. These are all, by the way, embodied in primates. They have all those P's, okay? But they don't have the 4th P, which is symbolic, syntactical, propositional knowing, okay? And so the root of this whole idea that's all part of this unified theory of knowledge that I built, this is actually the first root of the entire system, comes in 1996 to 1997, okay? And it has everything to do with the emergence of propositions, okay? So what we are right now at pre-propositional, we're participatory, we have a capacity for shared joint attention, and then we get symbolic tagging of our objects and verbs. So antelope there, okay? And that can create all this coordination. We probably got fire, we probably have some hunting, but then somebody gets the antelope are over there, okay? The antelope there, all right, is an associative coordinative matrix, okay? The antelope are over there is a declarative propositional statement, all right? Now what that does is it opens up the potential of a question that says, how do you know? Maybe they aren't, all right? So propositions then set the stage for the challenge, which is the question. You challenge the veracity of the proposition or its utility, okay? So once you have a meaning-making statement, now you're laying claim to a truth, which then opens up counterfactuals, which then can be pressed by questions. Okay.
Why is that not also true of just antelope there?
Because you need, in order to have the cognitive machinery, you can certainly navigate that, but you can't engage in veracity truth claim making. That's why we'll talk about the fundamental unit of language as a proposition, because it then makes a semantic truth claim that can then be challenged. Antelope there doesn't have enough of a machinery to make the truth claim. Okay, unless it's specified in relationship to a particular object field relation that's communicated. And from my vantage point, that's what the language acquisition device of syntax does.
So to make the point very fine, the point is what you were just saying, which is the object field relationship. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So the notion is that there is a moment at which there is a distinct and intentional mapping, associative mapping, to use like associational epistemology. Right. So the notion is that there is a way of so prior to that, so it's just, I'm going to like really, really zoom in on that, because I feel like that transition is crucial. In fact, it is crucial. I may even back up another step. But so there's a moment at which, and you use some really good words, and I'll just ask you to use them again. Utterances, coordinated sound making, has a. Well, I guess what was the language? What would you use? What's the
Well, they have a shared intentionality with a symbolic reference.
No, before we transition across the line, I say antelope there.
Right.
Which I think is akin more to like we're singing together.
Yep. Or other animals have very clear symbolic calls. Okay. So like certain kinds of squirrels will have a hawk call. Okay. Yeah. And that's different than a snake call. Okay. So but the other squirrel can't say, "Oh, you're BSing me."
Okay. So it's almost like it's more like almost like a release of a particular neurochemical in your body. It is a sign that is coordinated with a state, and it's almost mechanical in that sense. It's like there's a shift in my biological and dispositional state, which activates a particular expression. And no different than my pupils dilating when I perceive the presence of a predator.
Right.
So it has that, it's participatory up, very grounded participatory Ah, okay.
Mhm. Okay.
So antelope there is of that sort, meaning that there's no sort of, it may be wrong. There may not be
Mhm.
an antelope there, but it's just the same way that there may not be a hawk in the air when I perceive it, or that my
Right.
heartbeat going up because I perceive the
Exactly.
lion may be false, but
Right.
it's a qualitatively grounded in that way up. Okay, I'm with
Exactly.
you.
Exactly. So now, so we get the humans are coordinating, and they have to interact in a behavioral investment sense with the antelope there. Okay. But they are not engaged in propositional claim. And that what I give rise to then, once you get a proposition, you get rise to the question answer dynamic. Okay. The question answer dynamic is the proposition's the answer. Then you can question it. Okay. And as you'll notice with your children, the cognitive machinery of questions is really not that hard. Why, Dad? Why? Why? Okay. Well, answer it. Okay. The answer is actually where a lot of the machinery comes in. Okay. So once we get this is what's called the tipping point, and that gives ultimately rise to the culture person plane of existence on the tree of knowledge.
Hold on. Can I say this?
Yep.
So what I'm what I am imagining,
Mhm.
and this is the point. What I'm imagining is, in fact, precisely the emergence of a shared imaginal space.
Mhm.
This is the key move, right? The key move is in the mind, the development of a model of what is
Mhm.
as a, if not necessarily primary, at least
Mhm.
extremely important piece
Right.
of how your relationship with reality works.
Mhm.
And so what happens is when you begin to have a shared imaginary,
Yep.
so I have a model of what's on the other side of that wall.
Mhm.
And now, as we're discussing propositionally, what's happening is that we are basically updating our models
Right.
of what's on the shared in that model. So it's the
Right.
emergence of an imaginal space that
Mhm.
has a quality of reality to shape my choices
Mhm.
that are distinctly meaningful in the context of just my
Mhm.
physical condition.
Right.
And so
Mhm.
these two things are now sitting next to each other. On the
Mhm.
one hand, I have my current actual biological physical disposition, which
Mhm.
is responding to the phenomena that are going on.
Right.
But then I also have this mental model. I have
Right.
this imaginal space, which
Mhm.
is feeding back on and changing and
Right.
shifting and shaping my
Right.
disposition, right? So you have these two
Mhm.
things going on, which I'm sure that if we looked at it, and I'm sure you can do this chapter and verse, actually has a strict neurological correlate. I can actually talk about the prefrontal cortex and its
Yep.
relationship to the
Mhm.
cerebrum and to the
Mhm.
limbic
And
system,
this,
and things
by the
like
way,
that.
this at an individual level, this is happening first in the animal evolution. So animals with cortexes are doing this. That is,
Mhm.
they are unplugging from the immediacy of the environment and starting to run simulations about particular consequences.
Yep.
Okay. And then what we can do, what the human can do, almost certainly as a unique primate before we're verbal, is that we can intuit and generate shared attentional space. Okay. So we can actually engage in an implicit intersubjectivity that starts this process. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So now, before we have propositional knowledge, we can intuit that I'm pointing, I'm gesturing. You engage in mimicry. You can track my body. I point over there. You intuitively know I'm looking over there. That's a real talent that we have. And now this is creating this intersubjective space. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I'm with
Okay.
you.
And then we start symbolically tagging the objects and changes in terms of nouns and verbs, but it's not syntactical yet. So it's just a tag. Okay. And now all of a sudden our systems really start to come online. All right. And boom, then we get a language acquisition device where that symbol gets then organized sequentially into a kind of recursive syntax. Okay. Then you get propositional. Now you get a highway of information that not only has the shared imaginative, but can now create propositional layering of that shared imaginative. And that thing's going to actually then create a feedback loop because you
Yeah.
get a question answer dynamic. Okay. And what this does,
And just to be clear, my
yeah.
understanding as I'm listening to you, the question answer dynamic has to do with something like running a checksum
Mhm.
on the propositional
Yep.
machinery that is generating the intersubjective space.
Mhm. Right.
As I just did right then, right?
Exactly.
I
Mhm.
just basically
Boom.
ran a question. I didn't put a
Mhm.
question mark at the end of it, but what I just proposed was a
Yes.
question.
Right.
You said yes, click, click, checksum,
Boom.
intersubjective space has now got some degree of validation.
Exactly. We're building a system of justification now together.
Yeah. Okay. All right. All right, cool. Okay, so I'm going to put this in the field of conversation.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to show up yet, but think of it like the, what's that trope? Like somebody's gun, Chekhov's gun. This is Chekhov's gun in our conversation.
All right. Uh-huh.
So I was just like literally, whatever, 20. Wow, it's been 21 minutes. Man, that was intense. 22 minutes ago, was on a conversation with Jamie Wheel and Zach Stein. A couple of other folks were in it. And one of the things that came up was a notion that the emergence of language, that it goes singing predates speaking. That pre-linguistic humans, for example, had this omni bird call. Like we could emulate animal sounds in a generalized fashion. We could do the squirrel sound and do the bird sound, and had extremely high sensitivity to tonal matching and harmonics. And so you can imagine these sort of like bands of humans going around like singing.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
singing together creates
Mm-hmm.
a felt sense of communitas, right? You're now part of something. Right?
It's all what I call the gestural rhythm that's going to precede propositional language.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So for anybody who happens to be watching this, in the mindset, in addition to this, this frame that I was putting forward to kind of make my own sense of the transition, is that in the pre-propositional state, there's the music of the spheres. Like there's this deeply connected sense of harmony and interplay, which is primary. I have a very, very felt sense of that, and immediately acoustically. Right? There's a bird song, but it's now harmonic. Okay, so now we begin, and we transition over we leave Eden, we transition over into this new place, which has this entire field, this entire milieu of possibility. And as is always the case, we've just opened up a can of worms.
Right.
There's lots of moves that can be made inside propositional space. And as you say, by the time you're 4, you discover a crucial one, which is known as lie.
That's right. Well, you made a very important point about Eden, by the way, just so that the people are following, because this all fits in exactly what I'm trying to convey with the whole tree of knowledge, is that we fall out of Eden as a function of propositional knowledge and self-consciousness. Okay. So like we wake up to the paradise and then we name it and we call it good and evil and we name ourselves in the process. And all of a sudden we're like, oh my God, cover up and we're going to die. Because we have that capacity now through this kind of cognitive machinery and intersubjective dialogue space to generate a whole host of other adjacent possibles. It just opens up a radically new way.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So nice. All right. So if I kind of zoom in on it, if I take a look at the notion of lie, it's funny. I actually remember I had a class, like creative writing class, and I'm not sure if this is true. I'm gonna lie, but the story is good, which is that the professor actually had a bottle of bourbon on his desk, like at a university, and he had a Southern accent. So he was like a Southern writer, and he said, my people are natural liars, which makes us really good storytellers. All right. So the point there is something along the lines of this thing that we call lying is first and foremost this notion of iterating possibilities, right, in intersubjective space.
Right.
Of course, extremely powerful, right? If I can start, as I'm doing right now, right, I'm perturbating the possibility space by uttering a whole bunch of justifications, a series of propositions that hang together according to our epistemological and moral or ethical schema, and we're playing with them, Einsteinian thought experiments, which is a lot easier than trying to engage in, iterative practical testing on empirical ground, like physical ground. And I can benefit from the fact that you and I can play this game, in fact, remotely. You could be thousands of miles away and we're still playing the game, and we could roll other people into it. And so as called exploring this space of adjacent possible. So if one of the primary pruning rules or primary filtering mechanisms of adaptive fitness is the capacity to simultaneously expand the adjacent possible and search the adjacent possible, and I think both are crucial.
Absolutely.
Then this thing, clearly, right, once you start playing that game, then you've just exited. This is why it's a clear line, like it's a
Mhm.
phase transition. What do you call it? You call it a junction or a
Joint point.
A joint
A
point.
joint point between animal mind to culture person.
Yeah.
Yep. And that's why we're no longer apex predators, as Daniel Schmachtenberger often talks about. We change the rules of the game because we can accelerate because of the intergenerational transmission of knowledge, and the accumulation of that creates cultural evolution, which now means we're on a different acceleratory curve in the way in which we're navigating, so we can beat the, end up dominating everywhere we go.
Right. Yeah, the guys that I talked to at the Santa Fe Institute, I think, called that a portal pathway, which is the same.
Well,
idea.
if you see it on the, it's a whole. In fact, the fifth joint point is a portal pathway into the digital. I mean, each one of them is a portal pathway that then elicits a variation, selection, retention, complexity building feedback loop that's mediated through information processing communication systems, and boom, gives rise to a whole new plane of the possible.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go there. So we can know we sat for a moment at the emergence of systems of justification, and we've kind of got a little bit of a handle on what's up there together. Like now we're getting into this shared space, and we can kind of fast forward. So now we've got cultural evolution.
Right.
Step one, humans exit the role of apex predator and start playing a totally different game. Step two, they start playing that game against each other. We can focus on that if we like.
Right.
And maybe we'll
Game A.
Yeah, game A, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Game A, that's right, exactly. And then we enter into where we are now, right? Which is we're reaching the end of that phase, end of that stage.
Right.
So okay, so let's talk about that. So you talked about the digital. So let's do the same thing. Let's zoom into the tail end of the culture game, and then the emergence of the new thing.
Exactly. Okay. So let's ground ourselves about where we are so we can have a nice frame for what we can be talking about, what's very difficult to talk about given what we don't know is coming. Right.
Yeah.
So in the tree of knowledge says following matter, life, mind, and culture are such radically different planes of existence. Okay. Because what emerges is a coordinating system of information processing and communication networks that coordinate the flow of energy to give rise to more and more complex structure.
Yep.
Okay. So cells store information, RNA, DNA. They process that inside the lipid membrane and then communicate with each other. Okay. Then you jump up to animals, and nervous systems yoke cells together, coordinate the animal of the whole, and then animals communicate to each other. Okay. Then when we started jiving in our gestural symbolic way and then linked into propositions, we created the intersubjective language highway that yoked our subjective minds together to create the culture person plane. Okay. So the medium, to Marshall McLuhan, the medium's absolutely central, right? And ever since we started writing, so what we started to do with writing, we started to create an externalized memory of our symbolic language. Okay, so we externalized our memory, and then we stored that and created better and better systems so that other people could then process that when they learned how to read and develop printing presses. And then we developed computational systems on quantitative things like an abacus, and then turned that into a Babbage thinking machine, right? And then in the 20th century, we developed the silicon chip, we developed the internet, we developed artificial intelligence, and can yoke them together. What does that all mean? We have created a whole new information processing system and communication network, okay, out of material culture. So we built all these material cultural things, our technologies, but now we've created an independent, or at least interfacing, artificial intelligence network. So now there is information processing and communication taking place in just a radically different way. That's my term. Many people use the term digital. Okay, so the digital. So now that's why the tree of knowledge says very clearly we're going to be in a flux point. Okay. It's like what happened when we just discovered propositions. We have now just discovered digital and yoking digital and interfacing with digital and creating the whole digital interconnected internet. So we're on the cusp where we were at the fourth joint point. We're now on the cusp of the fifth, and we're now just opening up, like we use propositions. Now we're opening up digital interface spaces.
Okay, so something like we discover the intersubjective space,
Mhm.
and we begin exploring how to do it good.
Yep.
And we notice that there's a number of basic boundary conditions.
Right.
One boundary condition is how much intersubjective space can you hold?
Yep.
If I'm limited to the boundaries of human memory, there's a
Mhm.
certain limit to the amount of intersubjective space that can be generated.
Right.
Therefore, we begin the process of trying to cybernetically enhance memory.
Mhm.
And we discover that if we externalize memory into physical reality,
Mhm.
writing, then we have expanded that capacity and therefore can build much larger intersubjective spaces, which, as you say, also requires the creation of new particular skills and capacities like literacy, and probably cognitive structures for being able to do translations between languages and being able to
Absolutely.
run higher level abstractions to verify the epistemology has to get stronger as you start having more ambiguity built into the symbolic structure that's trying to map the intersubjective space. We also have notions about velocity, like as you said, and distance. Right? If the only way for me to read the book is I've got to travel to Milan by wagon, that's it slows down the ability for us to share the intersubjective space, which is basically at the end of the day a bandwidth issue. So if I can ramp up the bandwidth by virtue of being able to call somebody or talk with somebody, or if I can just do a video call over Zoom, the velocity of information exchange goes way up.
Yep.
So I can now, in the context of digital, we're reaching something along the lines of it feels like it's interesting to think about the quantitative qualitative shift at the quantitative level. So on this side of the transition, it's just like Moore's law, like
Right.
okay, the thing we've been
That's
doing for 70,000 years, we're just doing more of it faster, lots and lots and lots. And so memory is expanding, like doubling every year. Remember that?
Yep.
And velocity is increasing, and the number of interactions that can happen is increasing, and the reification capacity to do the checksum at the epistemological level is increasing in spite of the false news, fake news problem, which we're going to probably have to get to in this conversation. Then you've got this notion of a qualitative shift, and that's where things get real tricky.
Right.
That implies something which is not the same as person,
Right.
and not the same as culture.
No.
All of person and all of culture live below the line. So whatever we're talking about on the other side of the line ain't person and it ain't culture.
Yep. And right. So you have a novel information processing system in the way a silicon chip processes information, right? And then we build. So now we used to have, rocks, hammers, build houses, but now we build things that actually process information, computers on their own, right? And then they get more and more learning mechanisms, and then they get more interface. We call that artificial intelligence, of course. And whether it's artificial intelligence on its own, like Ray Kurzweil thinks, or like I think, which is really going to be artificial intelligence interfacing with human intelligence. And as our human capacity increases and we neural link, as Elon Musk was talking, we build the information processing of our capacity to plug into the internet. Okay. The opening of that interface is like, we're like jellyfish right before they got brains. You got a distributed neural net, right? And then you get a control center system, and then boom, all of a sudden you can move the whole goddamn system. So we have distributed, and it's getting more and more centralized, and whatever that tipping point is going to be is going to launch us into the digital. And that's what we're staring at here at the 21st century. This is why the blue church is so inadequate, because it's built on radically different information processing, communication, sense-making systems that are now inadequate to manage what we've opened up.
Right. And I think we can actually begin the process of making fundamental statements of what adequate looks like.
Yes.
I think that's where things get interesting. We can actually start defining the parameter space. It's like, look, I don't know what's going to be on the other side of that line, but I know for sure it's going to have this set of parameters.
Exactly.
And I'm going to go ahead.
Okay. I was just talking with a philosophical friend, and we were talking about, well, we can't know what it is, but he used the analogy, well, we can midwife it. Okay. Yeah. That is that we can put constraints on it, and then we can think about what is adequate to see coming down the pike and how to hold it in a way so that chaos and order and and framings are structured.
Well, there's a simple one, right? I can give you one very simple parameter.
Mhm.
If it kills everybody, then it's outside of the parameter space.
I think we can start there, right?
If it results in the extinction of all life, it's outside of the parameters.
It's certainly our parameter space.
But that's actually the point. There is actually, I think, let's drill deeper on that, because I think that there's something deeper there.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
When we were and exiting Eden is the hint, right? So we had a moment where we had this this thing that was coming up that had, to use John's language, it was at the level of participatory knowing, right? Relevance realization, something that is grounded all the way down to 13 billion years of evolution, right? All the way down with continuity, right? No discontinuity. Then we have this leaving of Eden, which has a discontinuity. Right? We somehow exit that to come into propositional space, which is a different kind of thing, right? Then, and the two are all, you're as you said, you're a primate. You're still a primate, and you're a person, right? But there's a discontinuity between person and primate, and we try to keep them linked. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes we engage in all kinds of crazy shit in person space that is absolutely out of alignment with our primate's nature, which generally makes us unhappy in the long term, but it might make us happy in the short term.
Sure.
Tell ourselves lies like crazy. So the proposition that that digital, that total, that set of digital that extinguishes all life is outside the parameter space is another way of saying that the discontinuity between the propositional and the participatory is outside the parameter space. That the digital must of necessity be connected, must be in continuity with the whole evolutionary story.
Exactly. So, and that's why I like to call it the digital metacultural transcendent. Okay. What I hope for, and what I mean by that is the constraints of the emerging digital, okay, need to be connected to the root from metacultural down into cultural, into mind, into life.
Yeah.
And, and the wise way, if we do it wisely, we open up heaven. And if we do it right, and that's the, and by the way, that's the whole metaphor from the tree of knowledge into the garden, okay, is a return to the garden, all right, that allows for, if we get it right, if we get it wisely done, we can align across and return to paradise.
All right, so check it. So this is, you mentioned Kurzweil. And by saying Kurzweil, I'm just going to kind of invoke an entire category of, of thinking, of systems of justification. Earlier, I think actually even the very beginning of the conversation, we talked about the notion of, say, chess, which was an example of the notion of paradigm or system of justification. And we already did the thing where we said, hey, here's the challenge, here's the problem. If I put on my system of justification and take it as the whole of reality, remember the technical term?
Yeah.
I'm fucked.
Yeah.
Because no system of justification can have the full complexity of actual reality. And it has built into it an entire set of conflicts and blind spots and commitments that are themselves unjustifiable.
It's not going to be up to the task.
Right. So in the move to digital cannot come at the behest of or through any system of justification, because all systems of justification are equivalently lacking in this exact way.
Exactly. And this gets right back actually to the kind of sensibility that we need. We need some sort of trans-paradigmatic sensibility, right? That I do think needs some sort of meta guiding point, but there is a way in which we need to realize that we need to jump above our normal paradigmatic way. And certainly to try to take a paradigmatic way and to try to impose it upon the digital is a guaranteed fucked.
Right, guaranteed fucked. And it's funny. I mean, we can dance around that, and if anybody feels like we need to, we can double click on it. But the word, I agree with you. I completely agree with you. Guaranteed fucked. And just kind of throw a little bit there. It's the same degree of guaranteed that thermodynamics makes in a closed system. Right? Once I've closed the system, it's just a matter of time before all free energy is gone and I reach a level of entropic equilibrium, which we can call guaranteed fucked from the point of view of anything that wants to continue to live.
Right, exactly. We need that free energy rate flow in order to have our organization. If we lose constraints, we're going to be doomed.
So, okay, so there's some good stuff there. So the question then might be something like, a couple of things come up, right? So one has to do with what's the relationship between the trans-paradigmatic and the pre-paradigmatic?
Okay.
I feel like there's something useful there, right? We don't want to fall into the pre-paradigmatic because that's not very helpful. We went through the whole paradigmatic. That was a lot of work. A lot of people died. Let's make that useful.
Sure.
But there's something about the trans-paradigmatic that is akin to the pre-paradigmatic.
Right.
So maybe we could just talk about what is the trans-paradigmatic. Maybe that's a key piece to focus on.
Right. So it depends on sort of the perspective. So let's keep going with this since we've been talking about kids. Okay. So kids come in and they internalize and they have in a classic Piaget way, they're sort of pre-paradigmatic. Okay. At the age of 3, 4, they can bring their logical systems to a particular point. All right. But they're not operating from them systematically. Okay. They don't run from situation to situation. By the time they get to 7 and 8 and start to believe what mom and dad believe, okay, they start to internalize mom and dad's paradigm, which is seen as God. That's just what's true, right? Okay. And then they have the adolescent break, right? And they basically like, wait a minute, there's other space outside of these paradigms, mom and dad. Maybe you made that stuff up. Okay. And then you get who says, why do you say, why don't I say? Okay. That's the adolescent individuation point where, depending, of course, on the cognitive complexity of the adolescent and the parents and everything else, but the way it plays. So now you get into adulthood where adults are trying to negotiate the paradigm. And we used to sit in systems that would have a general stable paradigm across generations. Okay. So, Middle Ages for a heck of a long time in Europe is Christian paradigm, right? That's what everybody had. But as you and John were talking about that other time, and we came back and looped in, the justification systems of understanding relative to the actual techno changes that are happening, right? It's just, it's information chaos. Okay. So what I would say and want to say is, all right, well, what comes after the adult? Well, in my model, then the sage. Okay. So the sage is then, if we go to Wilber, what is Wilber saying when he talks about trans versus pre, right? So the trans versus pre is that sometimes the trans will say what the pre does, but they say it from very different places, right? So the sage might say, hey, let's think carefully about Black Lives Matter, okay? And just like a pre-rational kind of non-understanding person say, I hate that stuff, okay? But the critic of the sage versus the rejecting of sort of a narrow white mentality, okay, might say the same thing, but from radically different perspectives. Okay, so that's a tree. Make sure you know where that's trans versus pre. That's Wilber's whole point, even though they might, and versus convention.
Okay, yeah.
Right? Okay, so inside the culture person plane, we want to cultivate a sage capacity, which in my estimation would be, hey, you need to rise above the abstractions of all the paradigms, to see across them, okay? To hold what's integrated across them and appreciate their pluralistic and have some coherence in that. Okay. So now let's talk about it. Why is now the trans in some ways now like the pre? Well, if we go into the digital world, right? Now we go up a level and we're in this space. Now we're the new kids on the block. I mean, whatever would be on the backside of this, we're the infants. I mean, that's why I so appreciated you and Daniel would talk. Well, first thing you got to know is you don't know anything now, right? We're back to sort of Socrates or whatever. It's just sort of like, you know, so now we're in another phase, and we got to bring this consciousness to it, but also realize on the backside of this thing, there are going to be stuff going on that 100 years from now, we can't even fathom. Is that jive?
Yeah. So what it activated in me was I felt myself, it's funny. Maybe we should just have this as a rule. If in doubt, jazz, which was, so I was thinking about that developmental process, and I was kind of invoking Zach, right? So Zach Stein,
sure.
Oftentimes development comes up in conversations with Zach.
Right. He always tells me I'm underdeveloped. And I was like, well, we can talk.
Well, because it's always true.
Yeah, hey. I'll take that.
Right. Okay. So let's slow this down. So adolescents, adults in relationship with each other. At least a piece of that, in the way that you're telling the story, has to do with the notion of who has authorship over the axiomatics in the paradigm.
Right.
So we have two big moves. I think it's important to kind of hold these. One move is the running of the paradigm per se. This is if you're in the game, is everybody playing the game? And it has the notions of fairness, like did we violate the rules, that kind of stuff. Right. Then the other move is the actual authorship of the paradigm. Right? Yep. This is, I think, where people get lost oftentimes. Many of the languages that we use, like sovereignty or authority, have to do with that second move.
Yep, right? Definitely.
So, certainly if I'm looking at it from a high enough level, I'm like, well, whoever makes the rules is definitely in the best position to win the game. Right? So I don't really care about how we play the game if I get to be the one who makes the rules. And that's what's happening in that adolescent moment, right? The adolescent is like, well, hold on now. I can see the fact that there's something going on here. And I notice, by the way, that I can challenge the rules. So they're not real, right? They're not kind of like this magic thing that I can't challenge. And then there's like, okay, what does that look like? How do I get into it? Now, if I drop into a pre-mode, right? But now I'm in the indigenous. So if I'm in the indigenous systems of justification, the adults are interacting with each other, still very held by the participatory, evolutionary context, right? Because if you defect on the tribe, we're all kind of going to die. Right? So there's a fast feedback loops on that kind of a thing. So the notion of who gets to make the rules is sort of distributed by necessity. Right. Anybody who tries to, and probably at that point, the consciousness of the skillfulness of being able to take, of steering the ship by driving the paradigm probably wasn't particularly rich. Right? It wasn't like known, whereas these days, of course, it is known. So you've got that, right? Now what happens though is we move forward in the culture game, that becomes the currency. It becomes the battlefield, right? I can fight the fight of like having a particular position inside a paradigm, but increasingly it becomes obvious to anybody who's worth the salt that the only move that matters is the one who's actually authoring paradigms. Culture War 2.0, right? I can be in one of Peter Lindbergh's boxes, but then I'm just kind of like I'm a player in somebody else's game. Or I could be creating the box. And the fighting is now going on at that level, right? And there's intrinsic conflict because there is no meta paradigm that can imperially distribute justice, which is just to say systems of justification across all paradigms, because at any point I can instantiate another paradigm which does not accept the axiomatics of that paradigm, and we're stuck, right? There you go. And we're stuck now in I guess, this is, I guess, the postmodernists got it, right? They were correct. That it's all sitting still on top of just nature. Right. And in nature, the law of tooth and claw predates the system of justification. Okay, so that's all there. So we end up with that as an acknowledgement, as a recognition. And now when you speak to the notion of the sage, who's going beyond the adult, first of all, the sage is aware of this. Right. And one of the things
they have metacognitive awareness. So, okay, so you can base it, I am a justifier. Huh. And I was situated in a justification. Huh. I wonder what that is. I can now empathize that other people were too. Huh. Now I can consider this. How do I know my position's right? You know, the Socrates, I would argue that Socrates really finds formal epistemology, okay? And the Socratic method is the realization that we built these systems of justification just on pragmatic convention, right? And then he thinks about it in terms of mathematics and then looks at our logic system as like, yeah, no, we're just basically BSing, right? That's why I didn't know anything all of a sudden. Right?
That's right. I poked literally just twice and realized there was nothing behind it.
Right. It was all just a bunch of BS. It's like, oh my God. They were building these pyramids to show that they had control, right? But actually it was just a performative act to gain control, and then they would be on top of it, and then they could legitimize it. But it wasn't axiomatic at the level of Pythagorean's theorem that's deductive. It was more social convention BS. So what is underneath social convention BS? Well, that's formal philosophy in the West really has been asking that question ever since. It's been basically trying
and it's been confused out of its mind.
Right, because it didn't understand that actually it's trapped inside the process of justification. You know, the nice thing about when I went insane is when I was like, oh my God, I'm seeing this as a psychologist. I'm like, oh my God, we're all a bunch of justifiers, including Socrates.
We're trapped inside, except we still have that primate, right?
Right. Well, right. On top of,
we have relevance realization, which is so this is like the return, you know, the resolution to the meaning crisis that John proposes. So, hey guys, check it out. It's okay.
Yes.
It's so fucking okay. You don't have to rely exclusively on systems of justification to make meaning, to figure out what to do. You've actually got this 13 billion year old machinery that's been fucking working across the history of all things.
Right.
That's the iceberg underneath this tiny little fucking novelty that just popped into existence in the universe that really can't do the thing you're asking it to do.
That's why I called us verbals. Okay.
Yeah.
Verbals, or primate verbal. Right?
Primate verbal.
Obviously rhymes with gerbil to let us know that we're chattering up here, right? On top of our primate system. And we got to pay attention how to align that thing, not just try to fantasize in some autistic way about how we could analyze our way out of this thing.
Back to it, right? And I think that's exactly right. The fantasize in some autistic way, double click that group of folks who want to do this thing. I'm tagging as Kurzweilian, who want to do this thing separate from relevance realization. No, just illogical. Just run
bad
the thought
idea.
Process. If you're of that type, I would invite you to just think it through. Just think very clearly about all the different things we were just talking about. You will arrive at the conclusion that that's actually illogical. It's actually a bad idea. You can formally prove that it cannot work. Therefore, some alternative approach is necessary, and we can propose what an alternative approach looks like, which is first and foremost to restitch the continuity between relevance realization and propositional structures, right? That exiting of Eden, the discontinuity, first and foremost, that has to be brought back into continuity. And it's not that complicated, right? It's a way of being able to reactivate, yeah, it's actually not complicated, it's just hard because we spent 50,000 years extinguishing capacities, and really intensely over the past several hundred years and insanely.
Well, once we develop civilization, but if we develop the cities in just the right way, if somebody's how to do that.
Yeah, get school gone, right? Just get rid of that. Which doesn't mean, by the way, we aren't thoughtful about how we promote development. But the machinery that was sort of copied from the Prussians, not the right way to do this. It's just a bad idea. Rewind. Not more, which is crazy. It drives me nuts, right? Whenever we run into a problem, people are like, well, how about more of this stuff that is terrible?
Oh my God.
How about none of it and then do something different? Can we escape from that paradigmatic trap?
Well, this is what the hope is. The hope is that with the right insights, of course, go back to Zach Stein, of course, in not only development, but education, right? We need the right teacherly authority to manage the right intergenerational transmission of information in the right way. If we are going to if we're going to midwife this thing.
Yeah.
Right. And this is a nightmare for us. It's just unbelievably complicated if we don't get the parameters right. Why? Because the world is changing so fast and the paradigms are so outdated, right? That the kids are looking back to us and saying, you guys don't know anything.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Right. And at one level, they're right, of course, but then they're very vulnerable. All of a sudden I was talking about, I spend 3 hours a day on the last 3 days on TikTok. I was like, what? I was like, oh yeah. I was like, and it's like, you do have something to learn from dad about like wisdom and depth and connecting to wisdom traditions, right? It's like, we need to have
and not spending 3 days on TikTok
and not spending 3 days on TikTok. It's just
so,
not,
all right. So let's do it for real. Let's actually
Mhm.
do the thing.
Mhm.
All right. I'm going to throw two things out. They're really vague right now, but I think I can get them out.
Okay.
So the one that's going to come later has to do with the protocols, the metacognitive protocols, or the protocols of trans-paradigmatic culture, something like that.
Yep. Got it.
All right. And then here, the thing that's going to come first is something like, what is this trans-paradigmatic mind, I suppose. We'll just put some words to
Call
it.
That.
What's it about? What's the thing? All right. Now, if we say, okay, and I like the idea of demoralizing or humiliating paradigms. Let's take them off their perch. Let's just call them games.
Perfect.
So I've got kind of the Enlightenment era game. Cool. Mm-hmm. I've got a medieval Islamic Golden Age game. Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I can identify a bunch of games, and I can say, okay, each one of these games is a system of justification that has some set of axiomatics, and a series of epistemological and ethical or moral, epistemological and moral evaluating functions that position a proposition inside that space. Right? That is what we're talking about. Okay, cool. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say like 2 or 3 things, and it actually starts to get pretty simple. So now I'm going to say is those games are tools. They're a means to an end.
Yep.
They're not an end in themselves, and they're certainly not the whole story. So what a trans-paradigmatic mind is good at is creating and is instantiating paradigms. So it's like a good artisan, right? An artisan is not a hammer machine. An artisan is an artisan. An artisan deals with the phenomenon in front of her, has access to being able to notice when a particular tool is the right tool for the job, and also maintains the capacity to design bespoke a tool. The idea of a jig. The idea of a jig is a great metaphor. If you do any woodwork, it's like, hey, I need to build a tool to do the thing. Like I could kind of try to struggle my way through by shoehorning a bunch of tools. I mean, yes, you can use a screwdriver as a hammer if you got to, but maybe a hammer is the right thing to do, right? So that ability to actually say, I am not my tools, I am the author of the tools, and to anchor yourself in that location, which is our humanness, right? We have that. We are that thing which gave rise to paradigms. We are not the paradigm. And so to build a artistry, a skillfulness in being able to discern which tools, which paradigms, right, are appropriate for the things that I'm engaged in, and when in fact it's necessary or useful to craft new ones bespoke in the context that I find myself in.
That sounds like a really good description of wisdom as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, so the wisdom and artistry, right? Wisdom would be something like the right judgment, and artistry would be skillful creation.
Exactly. So and I love the metacognitive, shift, that layer of self-reflective awareness that allows you to step outside the ocean that you're in and see the water.
Yeah.
See the water, your beliefs, and then relate to that in a healthy way, not in a freak out way, but in a healthy way, that orients you toward valued states of being and does so skillfully with aptness.
And reminder, when you are outside of the paradigm, you're not adrift. You're actually sitting on top of 13 billion years of relevance realization. And that's the tool, or the capacity. That is the capacity that is most appropriate to design, to novelty, to being in relationship with complexity. This is sort of Tyson Yunkaporta's key message is, hey guys, that indigenous knowing is more better at dealing with complexity than paradigms are. Right?
Yep.
Paradigms are really good at optimizing for certain stuff, but they don't deal with complexity.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So with Lean Rachel Anderson, you know, in her book Meta-Modernity, all right, we mesh this with justification systems theory. So her angle on metamodernism is there are four major sensibilities: oral indigenous, okay, pre-modern formal, modern scientific liberal democratic, and postmodern, okay, and they each have a particular kind of sensibility, ethos, you know, logic, right? So, you know, what are the rules of my house? How do I relate to my kids and my wife? That's oral indigenous, right? We make those things together. We embody them together. We decide, you know, then there's an mythos ethos at some level, okay, that we need to reference, which would, what is the religion that's not a religion and the role that that's going to play, right? We need to have a logical structure that does allow us some truth claims about the objective nature. Modernism does that pretty well. Postmodernism critiques the danger in which that maybe it gets empowered and then legitimizes as a hegemony, right? Which is there, and reminds us there is no one stance to have. And the trans-paradigmatic position would be some way of including and transcending those and place them aptly in the time between worlds that we find ourselves.
And going forward, we'll find ourselves in.
Right. Brilliant.
So then let's flip to the notion of the protocols, because we, in some sense, we were just describing subjective space. So let's talk about intersubjective space.
Right. Yep.
And I like the idea of protocol because at least it reminds me of, you know, in the internet, there are protocols that enable facilitate communication. They do not dictate what happens inside the communication.
Right. They put constraints on it. Yep.
Yeah.
That's right. Yep.
So some simple ones. Sorry, actually, let me back up a little bit. I want to put something in there. So one of the things that I was noticing as you were going through that last little bit was Nietzsche, I think, actually noticed this first, that a lot of the demoralization of postmodernists, and that shows up a lot in kind of the poor kids who were subjected to postmodernism without any context, is you know, if I spend millennia fucking up your relevance realization system in favor of optimizing your system of justification system, and then I take away your system of justification system, you may be forgiven for falling far on the stack, right? For becoming a nihilist, right?
Yes.
Saying, oh, well, I guess it just comes down to straight physical violence. You're like, well, no, actually, no. There's actually an enormous amount of getting along that happens pre-linguistically. We don't need propositions to harmonize. In fact, they're not even very functional for that. They're really good at putting intersubjective spaces.
Just watch a newborn and his mother, you know, with eye contact, and you see a participatory attachment dance that doesn't have a proposition in it. Right.
You know. So the first hint is to say, hey, you know, sorry, by the way, for all of us, we're all forgiven because we're all participating in it and all subjected to it.
Don't, you know, all right, well, you know, do over.
And it's far enough back, right? The exit from Edom is far enough back. You can't really point to anybody in particular. And I should say, by the way, it sort of had to happen. I mean, it's part of the story. It's part of the natural arc of things. It's no different than a lightning bolt. I mean, okay. So, but here we are. And you know, we're faced with a remembering or a reskilling, right? And say, okay, there's we've kind of we've been in the matrix. I think we've used this metaphor before. Like we've been in the matrix, now we're out of the matrix, and we're sort of this floppy body that doesn't have muscle tone.
Yeah,
fair enough. That's where we are. But it's actually not that insanely hard, because for a sizable arc of a developmental environment, we actually were building the core stuff. And you know, by the time, as you said, by the time you're 4, 5, 6, 7, you actually have got, you know, all the things I needed to learn in life I knew before kindergarten. You've got some of the basic stuff. So you sort of return back to that child's mind. Children are actually decently functional in relevance realization. So you've got it. You just have to kind of like be okay with
Right.
building it up from there and building skillfulness.
Mm-hmm.
And I like this notion of artistry. And so our job is to actually develop an artistry in this trans-paradigmatic location. I'm talking about intersubjective space.
Absolutely. I'm there.
So what I want is the net notion of the like omni jazz, where I bring my whole package, everything I've got, into the encounter with you, and you bring everything you've got into the encounter with me. But we're in the trans-paradigmatic space. It's like I don't know what's going to happen here. Could be anything. The game is not predefined.
Right.
But what is present is the protocols for producing games.
Right.
One protocol is be an artist.
Mm-hmm.
Build increasing skillfulness in the ambient hominid primate gift that is yours, and practice paradigmatic play. And drop in and out of paradigms, shift them, modify them, play with them. Notice how they work. You got to get good at it. This is a thing. It's a skill. Get good at it. And notice how your relevance realization machinery is just like playing music. You can vibe with the direction that is moving the right way. Like you know that it's there. You just can't say it until you've actually got the skillfulness of getting the words to match the feelings. Right? It's just like music. It is art. It is not just like art. It is art. That's what art is. If you've ever written poetry, you're very clear on the notion of how you do it, right? The order first is you have a felt sense, then you very carefully allow the words to move until they land such that the proposition resonates with the felt sense. That's poetry.
Nice.
Right? So that's the idea. It becomes skillful. Go ahead.
Right. Well, this is exactly what, I didn't know I was doing at the time, but so, my quest for all of this starts as I learned to do psychotherapy. Okay. So I start doing psychotherapy as a doctoral student, actually as a master's student when this really started to click. And I could drop into paradigms like behavioral paradigm, cognitive paradigm, Freudian paradigm, humanistic paradigm, you get it, right? And watch the experts play with that and see how they did it, and then watch the lousy ones, right? And then I had a pretty good gift that I could empathize with that and pull that paradigm on and see the world through family systems or behavioral or whatever, right? And then bounce around and be like, hey, all of these things make sense. And the idea that we're trying to race horses against them, right? Like compete and say, oh, family systems is the best. You come to my program and learn that. And behaviorism is the best. It's like, that's just not, so, and it's like, so anyway, and that of course, psychotherapy is fundamentally about how you relate to people. So I'm saying is that in a particularly sort of salient example is like, you can actually jump into paradigms and play with them, and learn how to speak the different ones and relate participatory and indigenous ways with people as you do. And we've been sold a bill of good that your whole identity has to be these propositional paradigms. And if you step outside of them, you're betraying them somehow.
Yes, that bill of good is crucial, right? And I'm going to double click on that just to make sure it gets the right kind of bias. It's like, hey, you are not a person, or more specifically, you are not an identity. You are vastly more, vastly more. In fact, infinitely more, but we'll not get there just yet. Crucial, right? To the degree to which you are struggling to sort of valorize your identity, I get it, right? You definitely don't want to have your identity be devalorized, but you are not your identity. Because your identity is a manifestation of a context of a particular culture, which is just say it's a piece of a paradigm. And we're now trans-paradigmatic, man. So you can actually play. And so this is my version of what you just said was actually I discovered Dungeons and Dragons in second grade. Right. So at the time where my sort of cultural paradigm hadn't really settled in, I was introduced to a world building role playing game, which was cool, and I was obsessive. So but I didn't just stick to that game, right? I started realizing that you could actually get all kinds of games. So I started getting other games that were in different milieu, like some were science fiction, some were different variations on fantasy. And what I noticed was that, each one was composed of a set of basic rules, right? Basic rules involved how do you create your character, what's your person, and then it was how do you navigate your characters moving through the intersubjective model of reality, right? Which is essentially your culture space, right? And those are the two structures. And then, of course, what happened was, of course, that insight could not be lost as I was interacting with the role-playing game that we call our culture.
Right.
I was like, oh, okay. So basically, this is just a really shitty game that for some reason I'm obligated to play. All right. And that's like an insight, probably like in fourth grade, because of that developmental context.
Absolutely.
Okay, so protocol 1, just increase your skillfulness, your artistry, your mastery of playing in paradigm space, and to become in this post-digital environment.
Right.
Protocol 2, bring it. Right, when you're showing up in an encounter, and I love this, with another artist, and by the way, that artist might be two. I guarantee you, if you interact with a 2-year-old as if you're interacting with a trans-paradigmatic artist, you will have a better encounter, and you will learn more. She'll have something to teach you. And the point is to say, hey, that's teacherly authority. The thing that happens first and foremost at any encounter is your own skillfulness, your own development. The thing that happens when you and I meet, Greg, what happens is I am transformed by the encounter, right?
Vice versa, right?
First thing in the protocol, the very first thing is that I am coming in not just expecting, but intending, and with commitment that it will happen, that I will be transformed in the encounter. By the way, transformed for the better. And for the better, again, goes back to protocol 1, which is say, in terms of my mastery and skillfulness of navigating reality and becoming an artist of paradigms in navigating reality as well. Okay, so now we get to protocol 3. Now in protocol 3, it's in this order, right? We have to hold it in that fashion. Protocol 3 are kind of like the heuristics of encounters. Here's a simple one. Don't kill the other person with physical violence. It tends to shut things down. Right? It makes the encounter much less than it could be.
Amen.
Right? But these are heuristics, right? That's just maybe the game, maybe what's happening right now is you're in fucking combat. Maybe it's beautiful combat. Maybe what needs to happen is that, I've seen movies where 2 sword fighters encounter each other in a beautiful dance, which ends up in death. But in the process, they both saw it as the absolute fulfillment of their being on the planet.
Absolutely.
Right? If that's the nature of what's up, if that's what's called for in the relationship, but as a heuristic, as just a rule of thumb, don't go there fast. If is that where it needs to be, let it settle. Right? Let it show up that way. By the way, it'll be sweeter anyway. The 5-fingered man or the 6-fingered man, that was like a whole arc of life, right? He looked for him for decades and lost him. Like, you want this, if you want it to be good, it's got to be good. You can't just come in and whack somebody. That's not good. That's lacking
not artistry.
Exactly. That's lacking of artistry.
That's sync.
So that's it, right? You can kind of there's the protocols are. So what are some other heuristics? There's some simple heuristics.
Don't use your power to insist that you dictate the game.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. If whenever you set up in a situation where. No, actually, there's an even stronger one. The stronger one, which is maybe somewhere in protocol 2, is something like, to the degree to which your own artistry supports and calls for nurturing the other in their capacity. So it is protocol 2. It's a deeper sense of protocol 2. Then do so. And so nurturing the other in the capacity, it's that teacherly moment, right? On the one hand, you're coming in expecting to be transformed. On the other hand, you're coming in expecting to transform, but with this nurturing sensibility, right? It's not my job or my intent to load code on you. I'm not teaching you stuff. I'm not throwing propositions at you. I am supporting you in your own discovery of your own artistry.
Right. That's a big difference, right?
It might be like, seem tired. Maybe you should get some rest, right?
Sure.
You're not playing your. It's again, it's like
not
a band.
Your A game. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. It's like a band. I'm coming in and my lead singer is hungover. Well, okay, I guess there's things that have to happen now before we can make this thing work.
Right.
And again, the 2-year-old's great. It's fucking nap time, man. Nap time is nap time. Let's take care of the basics. And once I've got that, it's like, okay, let's think about how many problems it solves. If it's like basic protocol 2 is that I take care of the other just so they can fucking show up as the artists that they are. Totally. Right. That's the base case.
So I'll throw some protocols from my structure on. So, keep in mind Maslow's hierarchy. You have the basics taken care of, right?
Yeah.
So let's say, and obviously fires are burden. or you don't have oxygen, you know, take care of that stuff.
Yep.
But if the rest of the system, if you got the base two, that's physiological, safety needs, you get that. Then look to the other, which is esteem and belonging. You know, let's see, those are, and then if you take care of that, actualization, that's good. But you know, let's keep those needs in mind. And the other system that I use, the black dot on the tree, of the theory of knowledge tree, represents what's called CALM-MO. Okay, that's an integrative approach to psychological mindfulness that I teach folks. MO stands for metacognitive observer. Okay, so that's, we're going to be aware of our awareness and be able to stand in that. It also doubles as MO, like your modus operandi. So it's like, how do you build that artistry? Okay, so it's a reminder, it's not easy actually to hold metacognitive awareness, especially if you're upset, you get bumped by life. And then calm, obviously, is a word, but then it's an acronym that stands for curiosity, acceptance, loving compassion, and motivated toward valued states of being.
Yeah, I like that. And calm is the return. I went through the words and came back to calm. And the thing that I was coming up with is like, you know, humility. And in the context of humility, it's something like, if I think about coming off the path, there's always the Scylla and the Charybdis. So one side is doing less than, the other side is doing more than. An example I would have is, say, you know, there's a bunch of people, and hold on one moment. And somebody's having a heart attack, right? You know, and I'm thinking about this in terms of almost like, call it like activist mind. Somebody do something. Okay, yes, somebody do something. This is a situation. Yeah. Now, if you were the only person, that somebody is you. And that something is what you can. If there's a lot of other people, the right thing to do is actually say, somebody do something, and only step in to do something if your artistry is equal to the event that is before you. Right? It's not that complicated, but this is, you know, if I'm dealing with, let's go back to parenting, a very simple structure. If I am emotionally overwhelmed and nutritionally deficient, and my 2-year-old is having a tantrum, I'm probably not the best person to be parenting right now.
Right.
It's the best choice is to actually see if there's someone else whose artistry is equal to the event that they're encountering, who can actually turn that into a joyful encounter, to use Spinoza's term. And I think that's crucial, right? I've called it in terms of don't bear anybody else's cross.
Right.
You've got a thing, you're at where you're at, you have certain capacities, live those capacities into the world as fully as you can, but no more and no less.
Right. Don't blow your charge if you overtake. I think you were saying that in some ways.
Yeah. Many people will tend to try to carry the whole load, and then all of that flows through them, and they just, you know, they blow a circuit, and that's no good, right? Because we need everybody. We need everybody to just moving forward fluidly and smoothly into ever higher levels of developmental capacity.
Right.
And so it's one of those, what do you call it? The Marines, right? Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Right? That metaphor is crucial for gathering. That's another good protocol, or another good heuristic.
Yes, definitely. For these times in particular.
Yeah, for these times in particular. So why are we there? We're there because if you begin to sort of back off and say, okay, well, this is actually in many ways, it's not that complicated. I don't need it. I'm not creating a paradigm. I'm not trying to create a meta paradigm to position every proposition in its value and its sense, right? I'm actually just creating protocols, parameters, some of which are more generally applicable, some of which are more contextually relevant, to constrain, simplify, really, to simplify choices, to give rise to this to the highest degree of possibility of intersubjective collaboration in trans-paradigmatic space.
Exactly. So let's build the protocol.
That's on the other side.
Exactly. Build the protocol that allows the framing of the agent or dual agent dialectic arena. right? We got to have some protocols for that, and then let the magic happen in the arena.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So then, and my point is, or not my point, but one of the things that I keep trying to kind of bring out there is the amount of capacity for change, good change, and it's crucial, like good and change, both,
Right.
that is unlocked in this mode is gargantuan. And so back to that notion of like, sometimes you got to build a tool. Like right now, we're trying to use the pointy end of a screwdriver to hammer in a penny nail, right? We're making holes in the wood. We're like bending the nail. We're poking ourselves in the finger. We're way using the wrong tool. Way, right? We're defining a tool right now. We are using trans-paradigmatic mind and the beginnings of some post-paradigmatic protocols to be able to support the defining of a tool.
Right.
Which tool has, it just kind of comparatively, has as much capacity to respond to reality as the sum total of all of culture had in relationship to animal behavior.
Right. Nicely placed.
So it's a good idea. It's a good idea to do that. It's a very good choice to do that. And in these times, we're just going to continue to notice that not doing that is a bad choice.
Right. And right. And let's help people see also what is happening. So as the collapse of our understanding occurs, okay, meaning, oh my God, well, people get anxious and they regress, and what do? They cling to what it is that they feel they know. Okay, so many individuals are defaulting to a clinging of the paradigm.
Yeah.
Right. And exactly the converse, that what the situation calls for is, step outside and look at it. Don't like put all in on it. Right.
Okay. Yeah.
So we have to,
or they drop a lower level even more.
Right. Well, they just regresses
off.
into it. Well, they just go to core belief, and you screwed me, and I'm going to attack you.
Yeah.
that's the foundational kind of. But there you'll see the justification system collapse into that. But it will all be then, as humans will do, as persons will then legitimize through the paradigm, unless they're really completely emotionally impulsive,
Okay, cool.
So legitimize through the paradigm.
So one of the things that just came up there, and maybe we're maybe to the tail end of this conversation, is liars, and specifically sociopaths.
Right.
And so here's it keeps coming up, right?
Well, they're a problem.
They're a problem. Psychopaths, even more so. Dan Schmachtenberger kind of helped me get a psychopath is the sociopath who's capable of engaging in high quality, long-term strategic planning.
Okay.
That's the way he's defining that term.
Fair enough.
Flying around all over the place, but those are real tough.
Right.
So, if maybe it's protocol 4 or something like that. So one of the challenges is that if I interact using these various protocols and the encounter I'm having is actually with a psychopath, I'm in trouble. Because that's the niche that psychopaths are designed to exploit.
Yeah, the charming, intelligent ones.
And that notion of you screwed me, so I'm going to attack you, is the developmental response to the reality of the emergence of the possibility of you screwed me, right? At the end of the day, the problem is that when the niche of culture opened up, inside that niche, parasitism of the intersubjective space also opened up as a niche and began to explore its developmental environment. And sociopaths and psychopaths got very good at exploiting and maintaining and controlling and duplicity and everything else. So, and I've noticed, by the way, and I think this is legit, but how do I say it? It's not skillful, but it's a good operating heuristic. I've noticed that the internet people, so millennials, in particular millennials, like younger millennials, have a strong bias towards assuming bad guy, interactive bad guy. So the person who I'm interacting with, usually somebody I'm interacting with, like seeing online, the idea of grifter, right? That the culture, the meta culture that we live in, is so super saturated with hardcore psychopaths and with what I call like default or as if sociopaths, i.e. people who aren't obligate sociopaths, but have adapted to having to be sociopaths in this environment, that the sort of the primate is sort of like seeing bad guys everywhere, because if you don't defend yourself, you'll simply be subject to parasitism or prey.
Right.
So the challenge is, okay, we got to get through that. We got to get on the other side of that. We have to find a way to be able to be quite sensitive to when we're encountering somebody who is in fact a psychopath. Then we have to have mechanisms for an autoimmune system, as it were. We have to sort of create capsids around that. We have to inhibit that that niche. We have to extinguish that niche, right? So the end of the culture story, one of the big pieces of the end of the culture story is the development of a highly effective autoimmune system to that kind of stuff. And it's an interesting challenge.
Absolutely.
It's a seriously interesting challenge.
Absolutely. At some other future conversation, we can possibly spend some time riffing off of. So the justification hypothesis is the idea that the propositional language created the question-answer dynamic, and that tipped, us from animal-mental into culture. And then, but that's one idea in the whole justification systems theory. That's 1/3 of it. The second we've been riffing off of here is the idea that actually then what that space is systems of justification. The best way to think about capital C culture person plane is really thinking about that propositional language system taking off. The other part of the triangle is the model of human consciousness that merges out of this. It's called the updated tripartite model of human consciousness. And that gets into the differentiation between our phenomenological consciousness, nonverbal perceptual, perspectival participatory, our private propositional, and our public propositional. All right. And the dynamic, and it's called updated tripartite because it's a reference to Freud. Freud's tripartite is id, ego, superego. So this updates what Freud saw and then tells us about exactly the kind of dynamics that are operative when we have this whole problem of other deception, which is the justification in the social world, and even self-deception, which is like, why would we even actually deceive ourselves and say, actually, I'm a nice guy, even when you're behaving like an a-hole? You believe you're a nice guy. That happens all the time. So this actually provides a framework for the whole shadow self, where the shadow self comes with, what you hide from yourself, your self-consciousness system relative to your heart, and then how you BS other people. And so to gain the frequencies across these domains, it provides a way to find the flashlight so that we can hone in on the ways in which deception happens and then create systems, protocols that allow clear lines of communication that build upon each other in cumulative and healthy ways.
Yeah, there's a lot there. It is definitely too much for where we are now. It feels super ripe though. So maybe
we'll do it again.
I love, by the way, that when I send you a message and say, hey, let's talk, you actually come back to me, as far as I can tell, faster than the internet could have worked. But it's thank you.
I stay, I live, my system got plugged into the email world and I'm like running connections all over it and staying on it. So there it is.
All right, man.
All right, man.
Great talking to you.
I enjoyed it. I'm glad. I enjoyed it. Peace.